This evening we're going to be looking at the promise of better. That God has given us promises, and these promises are better. Things that have been given to us, things that are God even taking oaths concerning about, that there is something better that is being given, that was promised many centuries ago, and there are still promises that we wait. But there are other things that have been given that we do have things that are better. And God gives us these promises. And first off, we're going to look at the promise of better for the faithful. Now, we go to Philippians chapter 1. And Paul is, of course, writing to the church in Philippi. We go to Philippians chapter 1, and we just begin in verse 19. And Paul is toward the end of his life. And he writes this, "For I know that this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayers and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, according to the earnest expectation and hope that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but with all boldness as always, so now also Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death." Okay? Saying that no matter what happens, Christ is magnified. Christ will be glorified. The magnificence of him is shown, whether Paul lives or whether he dies. "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." What does he mean by that? To live is Christ? That means, and he's going to explain it, but if he were allowed to live further from this point on, that he would be able to do more, teach more, help more in the kingdom, that he would have more fruit here, that he would bear more fruit, that he would bear more things that would be for Christ. But to die is gain. Well, what is that? That means his work here is over, the race is over, his trials are over, and he goes home. That's what it means. Verse 22, "But if I live on in the flesh, this will mean fruit from my labor, yet what I shall choose I cannot tell." And realistically, I'm not sure he's going to get the choice. That this is just going to be, whatever it is. God's the one that has the choice in here. Verse 23, "For I am hard pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is," look at this, "far better." Now, with the world, those that absolutely do not believe, those that reject Christ, they cannot say that death is far better than life. They can't, unless life is really, really bad for them. They cannot say it or long for it. That would be something that they would dread. And as we will see, for the wicked, death is not going to be good. It is not going to make things far better. But for the faithful, there is something better. While this world has its beauty and has its definitely has a charm to it, and has we make it our home while we are here. We become very accustomed to it, and we can like it, and we don't need to love it. Not love it more than what the promises that have been given to us. Certainly not. But there is something better still, and it's not on this earth. The faithful have something much better. Now, we go to Hebrews. And in Hebrews, as we saw in our class, just listed them out throughout the book of Hebrews gives things that are currently better than the things of the past. Okay, and things that have just actually always been better. Christ is greater than the angels. Christ is greater or better than Moses. You have greater promises or better promises, a better hope. You have all these things because they have, everything has transpired, bringing it about. There was the promise that it would be brought about, but now there is the assurance, yeah, it's brought about. It has been done. But let's go to Hebrews chapter 7, beginning in verse 19. "For the law made nothing perfect. Well, what law is that? That's the law of the Old Testament. That's the law of Moses. It made nothing perfect. On the other hand, there is the bringing in of a better hope through which we draw near to God. A better hope. What is that hope? It's not by way of the law of Moses, which could make no one perfect, but it is that the assurance of Christ. It is that law of Christ. It is the sacrifice of Christ, the teaching of Christ. All that brings about a far better hope than what was in the past. What was in the past was a shadow of the better. Now the better is here. That the church is better than the law of Moses or Israel itself. Just as Christ is greater than Moses, so too is his church greater than the Israel. Far greater. But Israel actually was supposed to follow Christ right into the church. Some did, some did not. Now, we continue on. And inasmuch as he was not made priest without an oath, for they have become priests without an oath, but he with an oath, by him who said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not relent, you are priests forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Now, here is another thing. It makes for a better priesthood. Much better priesthood. One, the priests under the Levites, under the called Levitical priesthood or the Aaronic priesthood, they weren't brought in with an oath. And none of them were the Son of God. Aaron, as good as he might have been, had serious flaws. He's not the Son of God. But now the Son of God has been made a priest forever. And it is with an oath from God that we have that assurance, which is the highest assurance one could possibly get. Now, if God just said it, as we made mention this morning, if God just said it, then it's true. You can base your life on it. If God said it, then it's true. But if he put an oath to it, the Lord has sworn and will not relent, that is as powerful a language, as powerful of an assurance as you can possibly get. Now, we go to verse 22. By so much more, Jesus has become a surety of a better covenant. Now, in just what we have read, in all of this, we see where there is a better hope, there is a better high priest and better priesthood, and there is a better covenant. Because this covenant, unlike the last one, can make us perfect. Can make us complete. Sins can be taken away. What was done in the past with the sacrifices made, whether it was on the other side of the flood, or whether it happened to be what Abraham did, or whether what was done in the tabernacle or in the temple, none of those could take away sin. So if they can't take away sin, what do? Well, they cannot make one perfect. So if they can't make one perfect, what do? It was, in fact, obedience to God with the shadow of the greater. The shadow of what is better. The shadow of the foreshadowing of something that does take away sins completely. Now, we go to chapter 11. We did read this in our class this morning, but we'll read it again. Hebrews chapter 11, beginning in verse 13. These all died in faith. Well, who have we talked about? Well, we've talked about Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Sarah. All of them, we've talked about. There will be more. Moses will be discussed, and then Rahab, and then others brought in by name of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. These will be brought in later in the chapter. But these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Okay, so when we're talking about Abel, did he see the promises? No. Enoch? No. Well, Enoch was a prophet, and Enoch knew considerable amount of things. He walked with God, but he never saw the promises. Same thing with Noah and Abraham and Sarah. They never saw the promises. What promises were those? Well, of course, there was the land promise, but that's pretty meager compared to the promise, because the promise was the Christ, the one who comes to take away the sins of the world, the lamb supplied by God, not the lamb supplied by men, but by God. And he takes away the sins of the world. And also that promise of someplace greater. It's not that of Palestine. It's not there in what is commonly referred to as the Levant, there on the Mediterranean. It's on the eastern side of the Mediterranean. It doesn't mean that. It's something that is far greater. For verse 14, for those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. Not here. They seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. Specifically, I think when we can understand it specifically, with Abraham and Sarah, that they could have easily just gone back to gone back to Mesopotamia. They could have done that. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. When they seek a homeland, where are they seeking? A heavenly country, not here. Well, this is the only one I can see, therefore, what does God expect me to do? Believe in His promises. That's what He expects. That's having faith. Believe in His Word. Quite often, we can look at the lives of others and we can know exactly what they should do. We can know exactly what they should do. But when it's us, quite often, when we're in the hot seat, as it were, when we're at that point of we now have to make the decision for our lives, and we have something in the game, we have something to risk, suddenly it's not as clear anymore to us, because temptation is coming over, and temptation says, don't trust God at all. But there is a heavenly country, and they were looking for that. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He had prepared a city for them. He has prepared a city for them. He's done it. And here, among these who were put off as examples of faith, they are put forward. Here are examples of those who had faith. They did not have faith in this world. They had faith in God, and they sought something better. And it was that country, that heavenly country, that they were looking for. Now, let's go to verse 35. This is still in Hebrews chapter 11. A number of other people have been mentioned since we finished in verse 16. And some of those, Moses, Rahab, Gideon, Barak, and also others that we will see where would be someone like Daniel or someone like Jeremiah. Though not named, we can tell that, that seems to be something they went through. But we find this. Let's begin in verse 33. Who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. Well, that would certainly be Daniel there. Quenched the violence of fire. That would be in the book of Daniel, that's for sure. with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Now notice this last part. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance. Not accepting deliverance. Why? That they might obtain a better resurrection. Well, there's only two types of resurrection. There's the resurrection to life. That is truly where one is brought home with God. Then there is that resurrection to condemnation. That resurrection that is being cast into hell forever. That's the only two there are. Now, notice, not accepting deliverance. It's not as though the ones torturing them said, well, do you want to continue on or should we stop for the day? It wasn't that choice. And they just said, no, keep going because I want a better resurrection. It wasn't that at all. Not accepting deliverance means that all you have to do is denounce God. All you have to do is worship this idol over here, such as what Nebuchadnezzar gives to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That just worship this image. That's all you have to do. But here, they did not accept deliverance because accepting deliverance would mean denial of God. It would mean that of just turning to temptation and yielding to it and desiring life on this earth far greater than life in eternity. Far greater than that better resurrection. Because there is that better resurrection that is promised to the faithful. Now we come to the wicked, because there is better given to the sinners as well. But this has a very bitter edge to it. Not a better edge, but a very bitter edge. And that they are not raised into heaven, but in fact cast away into hell. Let's go to Matthew chapter 18. Matthew 18 in verse 6. This concerns specifically someone who causes a little one to stumble. And a little one to stumble means that you have tempted that little one or brought that little one into sin. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, okay, it would be better for him, notice, here's the better. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. If that was his punishment, it'd be better for that. It would have been better to have done that than to have caused that little one to sin. It would have been far better. There is the better for the wicked. There is the better for them. This is all the better that they get. That it would have been better if your punishment, if that was it. But that's not going to be it. And there's not going to be that better resurrection. Understand that those that try to escape the pains and the shame and the grief in this life, they're trying to escape it. If they haven't turned to Christ, the grief will not be better. It will not turn out well. The gloom and the dismal nature of things or as it would seem, will not get better. Not in this life, and certainly not in the next. There is nothing good to look forward to in that, as of the wicked. There is nothing to look forward to. There is no hope. There is nothing better except what Jesus describes in this. And like I said, it has a horrible, jagged edge to it, to these words. Now, we go to 2 Peter. We go to 2 Peter and we go to chapter 2. And we will just begin in verse 18. And 2 Peter chapter 2 deals with false teachers. And we see these words concerning false teachers. For when they speak great swelling words of emptiness, they allure through the lust of the flesh, through lewdness, the ones who have actually escaped from those who live in error. Okay, what does that mean? That means you can have false teachers that can lure members of the church, lure Christians out of the church, out of their salvation, lure them to take them away by how? These words of emptiness, through lust of the flesh, through lewdness. This is how it's done. They've escaped the pollutions of the world. They have escaped this error. Verse 10, while they promise them liberty, they themselves are slaves of corruption. For by whom a person is overcome, by him also he is brought into bondage. Or what about this is good? What about this is even better? There's nothing better. What they had was the best. They were in the church with the best hope, with the best promises, with the best of everything. And now, by way of deception and empty words and empty promises and sin, they are taken out and they are brought into bondage. Verse 20, for if, after they have escaped the pollutions of the world, through the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled in them and overcome, the latter end is worse for them than the beginning. Notice verse 21. For it would have been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than having known it to turn from the holy commandment delivered to them. That's the better they get. That's all they get. The latter end is actually worse. Now, those who are among the wicked, having never known Christ, having never known really much about anything, just rejecting the truth and have never really witnessed it firsthand, all right, they're going to be condemned. And it's going to be harsh. But for someone who was among the saved and now having gone back out into the pollutions of the world, back in the pollutions of the world, now the latter end is worse than the first. It would have been better if they had never known these things. It'd be better for them if they had never known. Well, how is that? They would still be going to hell, yeah. But now things are worse. Worse. Does that mean that there are levels of punishment? Degrees of punishment? The Bible teaches it. The Bible definitely teaches that. Luke chapter 12, in a parable, it is taught. There are degrees of punishment. For someone who is in absolute ignorance, God will deal with that person justly. But if they're in their sins, they're in their sins. That's the way it is. But someone who knows the truth and rejects the truth, that person is going to be held at a higher standard. They're going to be held at a greater responsibility because they weren't ignorant. They did know. They did know. And I'm telling you, there's a lot of people living today, they have access to this. They have access. They have access to the truth. And how many times has someone told them, one way or another, that this is the Word of God, and yet they don't even make the first attempt? All right? They will be punished. They'll be punished. They'll be punished at a greater degree than someone who had no access whatsoever. None at all. But it's far worse of someone who truly saw how good and gracious Christ is and what He has to give, and then they reject it. They turn back to the world. And we go back to those words in Hebrews 11 and 35, not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. The world has nothing to give that's better than this. The world has nothing to give. There is anything that seems like a lure is just that. It's a lure. Well, what is a lure? A lure always has a hook to it. A lure always has a trap to it. And there is a lot of deception that goes on in this world to try to lure people into sin. A lot of pressure put on folks, and a lot of pressure put on the faithful. But understand, there's a better country. There is a better hope in a better covenant by a better high priest. There is a better sacrifice, and it's been done. All of this has been accomplished, and we didn't do it. All of it has been accomplished for us. And this isn't bitter at all. This doesn't have that jagged edge to it. This is given by the greatest assurance that can be made. And it is by God, who will never deceive us, will never give us empty words, ever, but only has love for us and gives us precisely what we need. We are here today by the grace of God. We have been spared to this point. And God expects us to take this time and do what we're called to do. To take this time and do what we're supposed to be doing. And take this time as another means of graciousness from Him, another act of graciousness from Him, to correct any way that needs to be corrected. Whatever that is, whether it is to grow in His Word, to filter out sins and repent of those things, whatever needs to be done, God has given us today that time to do it. And He expects us to. He expects us to. And always understand the hope that is given to us. There is no better. There is nothing better. No one can top it. And once we are there, we can understand fully that God kept His promises. And He will. In a place that is beyond what we can possibly imagine. And in a place that He has prepared for those who are obedient to Him. We ask this evening that we look at our own lives and prepare ourselves for judgment. Prepare ourselves to be better people. To be better people and better servants of Christ. And we ask that if you need to respond to the invitation, or if we can help you, we ask that you come as we stand and sing.